The Montana sun burned hot overhead as Samuel Webb guided his horse across the eastern pasture. September had arrived with its familiar blend of warmth and the first whispers of autumn, and the prairie grass had turned the color of honey. Samuel had been mending fence posts since dawn, work that never seemed to end on a ranch this size, but he didn't mind. The solitude suited him, or at least that's what he told himself. Samuel was a man shaped by hard work and harder losses. At 38, he'd spent 15 years running this ranch alone, ever since his father passed and left him the land. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and hands calloused from years of labor. His dark hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and his blue eyes had the faraway look of someone who'd learned to find peace in his own company. The ranch stretched for miles in every direction, a patchwork of golden grassland interrupted by weathered fences and grazing cattle. The main house stood solid and square, built from timber and stone by his grandfather's hands. Behind it, the barn rose against the sky, its red paint faded to a rusty brown. There was a chicken coop, an equipment shed, and a bunkhouse that hadn't seen use in years. Samuel lived simply. He rose before the sun, worked until his muscles ached, and fell into bed when darkness claimed the prairie. He made his monthly trips to town for supplies, nodded politely to his neighbors, and asked nothing of anyone. People respected him, but few knew him. That was how he liked it. Until the day everything changed. It was mid-afternoon when Samuel decided to head back to the house for water and food. He'd been working in the heat for hours, and even his sturdy constitution had limits. He mounted his horse, Copper, a reliable chestnut gelding he'd raised from a foal, and turned toward home. They were crossing through the tall grass when Samuel saw something that made him pull hard on the reins. A figure was moving through the prairie ahead, stumbling and weaving like a person lost or injured. Samuel's eyes narrowed as he watched, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As he drew closer, his heart kicked hard against his ribs. It was a woman. She was walking with desperate, unsteady steps, her arms wrapped around her middle. Her blonde hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, and her clothes were torn and stained dark with what could only be blood. Even from a distance, Samuel could see she was in bad shape. He urged Copper forward, closing the gap between them. The woman hadn't noticed him yet. She was focused entirely on putting one foot in front of the other, moving with grim determination but no clear destination. Her face was pale beneath the dirt and blood, and when she finally looked up and saw him approaching, her expression filled with terror. Samuel had dealt with plenty of frightened animals in his time. He knew that sudden movements and loud voices only made things worse. He slowed Copper to a walk and kept his hands visible and relaxed. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Samuel Webb. This is my land. You're safe here." The woman stopped walking. She swayed on her feet, and for a moment Samuel thought she might collapse right there in the grass. But she caught herself, one hand pressed against her side, the other hanging limp. She was staring at him with wide eyes, her whole body trembling. Samuel dismounted slowly, making sure every movement was deliberate and unthreatening. He took a few steps forward, then stopped, giving her space. "You're hurt," he said gently. "Will you let me help you?" The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She tried again, her voice barely a whisper. "Please," she said, "please help me." Samuel closed the distance between them, his experienced eye assessing her injuries. There was blood on her tank top, more on her legs and arms. Her feet were wrapped in strips of torn fabric, and he could see they were cut and bleeding. She'd been through something terrible, but out here on the prairie, survival had to come before questions. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, but when she tried to take a step, her legs gave out. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms supporting her weight. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and exhausted muscle. Up close, he could see the extent of her injuries more clearly, and his concern deepened. "I've got you," he said quietly. "I'm going to put you on my horse, and we're going to get you back to my house. Can you hold on?" The woman nodded weakly. Samuel lifted her carefully onto Copper's back, then swung up behind her. She slumped against his chest immediately, her body going slack now that someone else was carrying the burden. Samuel wrapped one arm securely around her waist and took the reins with his free hand. "Stay with me," he murmured as Copper began the journey home. "Just stay with me. We'll be there soon." The ride felt longer than usual. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder. Samuel could feel her heart racing, could feel the heat of fever radiating from her skin. Whatever had happened to her, she needed help urgently. When they finally reached the ranch house, Samuel dismounted and carefully lifted her down from the saddle. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his for just a moment. In that brief connection, Samuel saw pain and fear, but also a desperate, fragile hope. He carried her inside and laid her gently on the sofa in the front room. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the full extent of her condition. The blood on her clothes was mostly dry, which meant the worst of the bleeding had stopped, but she had cuts and bruises covering her arms, legs, and torso. "I need to check your injuries," Samuel said, kneeling beside the sofa. "I need to see how bad it is. Is that all right?" The woman nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. Samuel went to fetch his medical supplies. Living alone on a ranch meant being prepared to handle emergencies. He had bandages, antiseptic, needle and thread for stitches. It wasn't a doctor's office, but it would have to do. When he returned, the woman was sitting up slightly, looking down at herself. Her hand was clutching the torn fabric of her tank top, and her face had flushed with what looked like shame or embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I must look awful." "You look alive," Samuel said simply, setting his supplies on the coffee table. "That's what matters right now." He sat down in the chair across from her, trying to figure out the best way to proceed. The blood on her tank top was concentrated around her abdomen and ribs, which meant he needed to see the wounds to treat them properly. But the woman was still clutching her shirt, still holding herself together through sheer willpower. "Ma'am," Samuel said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to see where you're hurt so I can help you. Some of these injuries might be serious." The woman's eyes overflowed with tears that tracked through the dirt on her cheeks. She shook her head, a small, helpless gesture. "I can't," she said. "After everything, I can't." Samuel understood. Whatever trauma she'd endured, the last thing she wanted was to feel more exposed, more vulnerable. But her life might depend on getting proper treatment. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Catherine," she whispered. "Catherine Miller." "Catherine," Samuel repeated, letting the name settle between them. "I'm going to be straight with you. You've got injuries that need attention, and I can't help you unless I can see them. I'm not a doctor, but I've dealt with plenty of wounds on this ranch. If we don't clean and treat these cuts, they could get infected. That could be dangerous." Catherine stared at him through her tears. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know you're right, but I can't make myself." "Whatever happened to you wasn't your fault," Samuel interrupted gently. "And I give you my word I'm only going to do what's necessary to treat your wounds. Nothing more. You're safe here, Catherine. I promise you that." They sat in silence. The old clock on the mantel ticked steadily, and somewhere outside, cattle lowed in the distance. Samuel waited patiently, giving her time to make the decision. He wouldn't force her, wouldn't pressure her. The choice had to be hers. Finally, Catherine took a shaky breath. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Take it off," she said. "Please." Samuel froze. He hadn't expected her to ask him to do it. He'd thought she might remove the torn clothing herself, or at least help. But she was asking him to do it for her, trusting him with that vulnerable act because she couldn't bring herself to do it alone. "Catherine," he said slowly, "are you sure? I can wait while you—" "Please," she interrupted, her eyes squeezed shut now. "I can't do it myself. I need someone I can trust to help me. Please, Samuel." The sound of his name from her lips hit him harder than he expected. In that moment, Samuel understood the weight of what she was asking. She was placing her trust in him, a complete stranger, because she had no other choice. Because despite everything she'd been through, some instinct told her he was safe. Samuel stood slowly and moved to kneel beside the sofa. His hands were steady despite the strangeness of the situation. He'd delivered countless calves, treated injured horses, even helped a neighbor through an emergency when the doctor couldn't arrive in time. This was medical necessity, he told himself. Nothing more. "I'm going to lift your shirt now," he said, narrating his actions so she wouldn't be startled. "Just enough to see and treat the wounds. If you want me to stop at any point, you just say so." "Understood." Catherine nodded, her hands falling away from the fabric she'd been clutching. Samuel carefully lifted the hem of her tank top, revealing the injuries beneath. There was a deep gash along her ribs that would definitely need stitches. Multiple scrapes and bruises covered her abdomen, but nothing looked immediately life-threatening. No signs of internal bleeding or critical damage. "It looks worse than it is," Samuel said, relief washing through him. "You're going to be okay, Catherine. But we need to clean these wounds and close that cut on your ribs." He grabbed a clean blanket from the back of the chair and draped it over her, preserving her dignity while he worked. Then he set about cleaning each wound with careful efficiency. Catherine flinched and gasped at the sting of antiseptic, but she stayed still and silent, her fingers twisted in the blanket. "You're doing great," Samuel murmured, his voice taking on the same gentle tone he used with nervous horses. "Almost done with the cleaning." He stitched the gash on her ribs with steady hands, each stitch small and precise. Catherine gripped the blanket so hard her knuckles turned white, but she didn't cry out. When he finally tied off the last stitch and sat back, Samuel felt exhausted, as if he'd just completed the hardest work of his life. "There," he said, "all finished. Now let's get you properly cleaned up." He helped Catherine to the bathroom, where he filled the old clawfoot tub with warm water. He left her with soap, clean towels, and one of his shirts that would serve as a nightgown. While she bathed, Samuel made soup from vegetables in his garden, thick and nourishing. When Catherine emerged, scrubbed clean with her damp hair combed back, Samuel could finally see her clearly. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 30, with delicate features and eyes the color of a summer sky. She looked small and lost in his oversized shirt, but there was something different in her expression now. The terror had faded, replaced by cautious relief. They ate in companionable silence at the kitchen table. Catherine managed half a bowl before exhaustion claimed her. Samuel carried her to his bedroom, the only proper bed in the house. He would take the sofa tonight. "Thank you," Catherine whispered as he pulled the quilt over her. "Thank you for everything, Samuel." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "It's just the right thing to do." Catherine reached out and caught his hand, her fingers cool against his work-roughened palm. "You're a good man," she said, her eyes already closing. "A truly good man." Samuel sat there for a moment after she'd fallen asleep, her hand still holding his, and felt something shift deep in his chest. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 15 years suddenly felt less like a choice and more like something he'd simply endured. The weeks that followed brought gradual changes to the ranch. Catherine healed slowly but steadily, her wounds closing, her strength returning. Samuel learned that she'd come from a small town 200 miles east, that she'd been traveling with a man who'd seemed charming at first but had turned violent. She'd escaped into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back, walking for days before Samuel found her. She didn't want to go back to her old life. She had no family to return to, no home to reclaim. The life she'd left behind held nothing but pain. As Catherine grew stronger, she began helping around the ranch. Small tasks at first, collecting eggs, helping prepare meals, mending clothes. But she was capable and quick to learn, and soon she was working alongside Samuel with the horses and cattle. They developed an easy partnership. Samuel found himself looking forward to her company, to the sound of her voice breaking the silence he'd grown so accustomed to. Catherine seemed to thrive in the rhythm of ranch life, the haunted look gradually leaving her eyes. One evening in late October, they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Catherine turned to Samuel with an expression that was both nervous and determined. "I need to tell you something," she said. Samuel felt his stomach tighten. "All right, I know I should probably think about moving on," Catherine said, the words coming in a rush. "Finding my own place somewhere, stopping my intrusion on your life. But Samuel, I don't want to leave. This place feels like home. You feel like..." She paused, searching for words. "You feel like home too." Samuel's heart pounded. He'd been feeling the same way for weeks but hadn't dared hope she might feel it too. What would a woman like her want with a weathered rancher who'd spent 15 years talking to cattle? "Catherine, He said carefully, "When I found you out on that prairie, I thought I was just helping someone who needed help. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. You became more than that. If you want to stay, if you want to build a life here, I'd be honored to build it with you." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Are you asking me to stay? Really, stay?" Samuel reached out and took her hand, the same hand that had gripped his that first night. "I'm asking you to marry me, Catherine Miller. I'm asking you to be my wife." Catherine laughed, a bright, clear sound that seemed to chase away the last shadows of her past. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "Yes, Samuel Webb, I'll marry you." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with the pastor and 2 rancher neighbors as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, and Samuel wore his Sunday best. As they spoke their vows, promising to love and honor each other through all their days, Samuel marveled at how life could surprise you. The lonely ranch became a home filled with warmth and laughter. Catherine had a gift for growing things, and soon the garden flourished with vegetables and flowers. She befriended the town women, who were charmed by her genuine kindness. Together, they made the ranch more prosperous than it had ever been. Samuel discovered that sharing his life made everything better. The work was still hard, but it felt purposeful. The quiet moments were still there, but now they were peaceful rather than lonely, a comfortable silence shared between 2 people who understood each other. Years passed, bringing the usual joys and sorrows. Hard winters and good harvests, sick cattle and healthy calves, lean times and prosperous ones. Through it all, Samuel and Catherine stood together, their bond growing deeper with each passing season. On quiet evenings when they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, Samuel would sometimes think back to that September day when he'd found a broken stranger stumbling across his land. He would think about how close he'd come to a lonelier life, and gratitude would wash over him. Catherine would notice him looking at her and smile, understanding without words. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. "How lucky I am," Samuel would answer. "How very lucky." And Catherine would lean against his shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead you to the best things. Sometimes being lost was the only way to find your way home. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden in the fading light, and Samuel Webb knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. It had taken him 38 years to find her, but Catherine was worth the wait. She was worth everything.